Welcome to Bone2Pick, HIP-BoneMusic's Artist of the Month interview series. I am extremely excited to introduce this month's artist, the great Gene Pokorny. Gene is one of my all-time favorite tubists, actually one of my favorite instrumentalists of any instrument. And Gene has been a member of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for 23 years. He has performed worldwide with various orchestras. He's released 3 solo CDs. A great teacher. He's pretty much done it all, and he's done it with class and elegance every step of the way. We are here today in Midtown Manhattan, just down the street from Carnegie Hall, where Gene will be performing with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra this weekend, and we are just absolutely delighted that he was willing to spend some time with us here this afternoon, and we can learn more about his amazing career and great life that he's led. Gene, thanks so much for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here, Mike.
All right, great stuff. Gene, you are a proud native of Southern California. I know you attended the University of Redlands and then got your degree from University of Southern California. I was wondering if you could maybe just share some of your thoughts about that time of your life, and also maybe touch on, I know Tommy Johnson, the great Tommy Johnson, was an important teacher in your development. Maybe just share some of your thoughts about Tommy.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Southern California. I was raised in a trailer park. My folks owned a trailer park in a little town called Downey, which was about a mile away from where they built the Apollo spacecraft that first went to the moon in 1969. I started off on trumpet and eventually went to saxophone and then clarinet, and finally took up the tuba when I was in high school. And it just so happened that there was a former member of my high school from 10 years before who I got to know, who was a choir director at this local Moravian church. His name was Jeff Reynolds, and he became the bass trombone player in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. There was a brass quintet that got put together at this church, and all of a sudden I started to really get into the tuba, and Jeff was a big influence. And I took some lessons from him, and he was just a great hero to me when I was growing up. And having those Southern California roots, and seeing the type of lifestyle that Jeff had, playing in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, I just kind of got in my mind, I want to do that when I grow up. So I just kept on pursuing that dream when I went off to college at the University of Redlands for 2 years, and had some very good music theory teachers there, and music history teachers, and finally I got hooked up with Tommy Johnson, who convinced me that I should go to USC, where I could more regularly study with him and see him every week. And when I went to the University of Southern California, by golly, I did manage to, and there was a lot of competition. He had a tremendous studio, and he was a gentle warrior who kept me going, and he would always push to try to get things at the right rhythm, the right time, the right sound. And when you have the greatest tuba sound in the world happening 3 feet from your head, you know, when he's playing for you, you couldn't help but just be inspired by that type of energy and that type of inspiration. And also along those lines, Tommy Johnson also recommended that I take some lessons with Roger Bobo, who played the tuba in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And Roger, of course, had many solo recordings out. In fact, many people in the Los Angeles Philharmonic who I listened to regularly had solo albums out. Tom Stevens, Miles Anderson at the time, Mario Guarneri, the Los Angeles Brass Quintet, the Los Angeles Brass Society. There was just lots of energy when we're talking about the early 70s. And this was something that was really inspiring, and to have kind of Tommy Johnson being my underpinning as I moved along was a real help.
Yeah, oh, that's great information. I forgot that your association with Jeff Reynolds, who I know has been a very positive influence on many low brass individuals, so it's great to hear that he had an impact on you as well. I know your first major professional job was with the Israel Philharmonic, and then from there you went to the Utah Symphony. Can you talk about maybe just a little bit how it was winning those first couple of auditions, and maybe what it was like being in those orchestras and how that kind of shaped where you were going to go eventually with your career.
Sure. My first job was with the Israel Philharmonic, and this was in 1975. I was a senior in college at the time, and basically Roger Bobo arranged this audition with Zubin Mehta, along with having some other local players in the Los Angeles area, about 4 of us. And we played this audition for Mehta, and then he was supposedly going to be hearing some players in Canada in the next couple weeks, and it was just something to do to get out of conducting class for one lazy Friday morning in May. And several weeks later, all of a sudden I got a call from Roger Bobo saying, call Zubin Mehta at this number, and it was a long distance number in Italy or somewhere. And he wanted to engage me as a tuba player for the Israel Philharmonic. So that was that audition. My audition for the Utah Symphony was a little more dire circumstances. The tuba player at the time, Charlie Eckenroth, died suddenly, and they needed somebody very quickly. And so I got a call on a Friday, and they said, just be out here by Monday. So packed my bags and went out. So that wasn't even an audition. The first real audition, real meaning advertised and everybody coming in and everybody kind of, that happened in St. Louis, and that was a real audition where I knew that I probably had something a little more special than others. But my time in Israel was really a very, very influential time, because I really learned there what music was all about, because I was very into the technical parts of playing while I was in Los Angeles, and playing things at the right time, and with the right tone, the right intonation, and all that. But I never really got into the emotional part of emoting through your instrument. At least I wasn't mature enough to realize that when I was in Los Angeles. So, being in Israel, which is of course a very emotional society, and that is a very emotional orchestra. You have the whole string section that basically were uprooted from native Russia, a lot of Jewish violinists who came to Israel, and they were all employed practically by the Israel Philharmonic, and you had many people still having numbers on their arms, you know, from the Holocaust times, and you just really got a chance to hear people really emoting through their instruments, more so than I'd ever experienced. So that was very influential time of my life. And then getting into Utah several years after that, after I left Israel, was another time when I just, all of a sudden, I'm back in the United States, and I'd spend hours just going through the jam and peanut butter sections of supermarkets, you know, just amazed to see all this stuff that I never saw in Israel, because there you just, you know, it was a different time. It was a different time. So I appreciated all of those different parts, and especially kind of learning the musical ins and outs, and listening to a lot of players in the Israel Philharmonic. That was a big influence.
What a great point. I mean, in just looking over your resume and thinking about what to ask you, I mean, I obviously starting with the Israel Philharmonic is an impressive thing, but it's really great that you just shared that with us. The fact that the emotional side of it, from coming out in the music, must have been, as you just described, quite amazing. So it's really a.
I remember one time in particular. We were on tour. The Israel Philharmonic was on tour. It was March of 1978. It was my last couple of months in the orchestra. We were in Australia, and we found out that there had been a terrorist attack right on the road between Tel Aviv and Haifa, where some Arab terrorists had gotten on the shore and commandeered a bus full of Israeli school kids, shot them up, blew the bus up, and there was also a car that was hit with some gunfire. As it turned out to be, it was the family of a tuba student of mine who and his little brother was killed. In fact, I don't know, a month or so later, he drove by and we had a lesson, and he came out and he showed me the bullet hole in the back of the car. But the point is that we played, I remember very distinctly, we played a concert that night in Melbourne, Australia, at the City Hall. And the last piece we did on the concert was Hatikva, which is the Israeli national anthem. And I mean, the whole orchestra was just crying their eyes out and playing and it was just a very emotional time. You know, there's a lot of, being Jewish isn't just a hobby. You know, it's really, really some.
Yeah, that's an
strong.
amazing story. Well, as a fan of great orchestral brass performance, I first, to be honest, I first became aware of your playing when you were with the St. Louis Symphony. We have a great mutual friend in Jim Martin, who is a wonderful bass trombonist and a great guy and a great musician.
Fantastic.
And we could talk about Jim for an hour, but let's...
Actually, that'd be more interesting. I'd like to talk about Jim for an hour.
He's quite a guy, and I just spent a week with him teaching up at Eastman this summer. It was really, he's fantastic influence on everybody he comes in contact with. But he was always telling me, you got to hear this guy, Gene Pokorny. It's unbelievable. You never heard the tuba like it. And he was absolutely correct in that, not overselling it in the slightest way. But you talked a little bit about St. Louis, and maybe you could talk a little more about being in that orchestra. I know it's still obviously an incredible orchestra and one of the best orchestras in the United States, but it seemed like the time you were in it was kind of an apex for the orchestra. Musically, it was doing some great things, doing a lot of recording. The visibility factor seemed to be very high for that orchestra at the time. But anyway, maybe you could just share some of your thoughts about your time in St. Louis.
St. Louis was a really great time. I never thought that would work out because I went to take the audition, among other reasons, because the week before the audition actually took place, I was sitting at the airport waiting to pick somebody up, and I was reading, there was this Time magazine article that came out that was listing the symphony orchestras, the top-notch ones. And Chicago, they listed #1, which wasn't much of a surprise, but then they listed the #2 orchestra as being St. Louis. And that kind of caught my eye because the tuba opening was there at the time. So, and it said they did a lot of Prokofiev, a lot of Shostakovich, Eastern European stuff, and I figured, well, we don't do a lot of Prokofiev in Utah. We didn't do much of anything in Utah. I mean, we didn't do a lot. We didn't do that type of music in Utah. So I figured, well, this might be kind of nice. And besides, I like ribs. St. Louis, hey, you're getting pretty close to Kansas City.
A little further.
Yeah. It's in ground-to-ground missile range. Let's do it. So went out there, took the audition, and but to move from the beautiful mountains of the Great Salt Lake Valley and the great topography that's around there, and to go into the flatlands of St. Louis was, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? But then I realized, boy, this is pretty nice, and the orchestra was very, very good.
Yeah.
And the type of chemistry, and I think it's very important for orchestras to have the right chemistry, between Leonard Slatkin and the orchestra was really, really good. And the orchestra was putting out some very good recordings at the time. One of the first things that happened when I got there was we recorded the Prokofiev Fifth Symphony, and we did his Prokofiev Cinderella Suite, and just a lot of recording was done. And that hall is very, very good, Powell Symphony Hall. Lots of bottom resonance. We had a very good, very secured brass section. The horns were very good. Susan Slaughter on principal trumpet was just a gem, just unbelievable. A really interdependent type of player who was really team spirited and really was very cohesive in getting a lot of that, a lot of the brass section together. And bass trombone was not too loud, so it didn't create a bit of a problem regarding balance. I mean, we got a really nice pyramidal sense of balance, which is something that George Zell did a lot with the Cleveland Orchestra, and in band area, W. Francis Macbeth, he was a real advocate of that pyramidal sense of balance where the tuba, the bottom voices are the strongest, the most reliable, and you get up to the third trombone, second trombone slightly less, first trombone less, and as you go up, as you go higher, you don't have to make as many adjustments, but you have to have that pyramid set up, and in that hall it just worked great. So that was one thing that was just very pivotal about being in the St. Louis Symphony at the time. And I had the opportunity to have some summers off because the summer was kind of optional. To do these pops, and so I would head off and do some music festivals. I go off and do Colorado Music Festival, and there in Boulder, Colorado was where I cut my teeth on the Mahler symphonies, because we didn't do a lot of Mahler in St. Louis, and had some good time. So I had some time in the summer to kind of breathe a little bit. And I would come back to St. Louis and get some good things done. It was a great atmosphere there at the time. Management was strong, orchestra was strong, great players, and a great town. Great town. I learned that I didn't need the mountains to be happy. It was a great town to live in.
Yeah, that's a great spirit there. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Before we get to the Chicago Symphony time, which is obviously what we'd like to talk a great deal about, I know you went back to Los Angeles for a certain period of time, did some playing with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and also did some work in the studios on some motion picture soundtracks. I'm wondering if you can just talk about how that felt to go back and just your experience seeing some of your teachers in that capacity as a professional player.
Well, it was great to go back to LA because it was because my file cabinet that was full of maps of different cities. It was nice to actually go to a place where I didn't need a map, because hey, I know the mountains are up north, and the ocean is out west, and you try to figure that one out in St. Louis. You can't find any mountains, you can't find an ocean, but it was great to go back to LA, and probably one of the best things about playing in the LA Philharmonic was being able to sit next to Jeff Reynolds again, because I always respect him as a consummate teacher, and one who was just such a great person all around, and to be able to sit next to him as often as I did during that one season in LA, and to learn from him again. I don't know if he realized he was teaching me, but just watching him work, watching him listen, watching him mark his parts and stuff was just a really great education for me, and just reminded me of how fortunate I was those years earlier when I was working with him. And then those couple times I got called in to do some movie soundtracks, The Fugitive. There was one lazy afternoon at Jurassic Park. I think Tommy Johnson brought me in for that, and I managed to be able to sit next to Tommy Johnson and Jim Self and a couple other players as well, and especially to work again with Tommy Johnson to sit and kind of develop more of a friendship with him. Than it being a student-teacher type of thing, and be able to hang a little bit in that 1 year. So it was great fun to be back and to kind of see that scene from a whole different way, because I never really played I never did studio work before, and to kind of see how that all worked out, and to see how that is for the players out there, and to be able to be with players like Malcolm McNabb and Bill Reichenbach and Charlie Loper and Dick Nash, and it was great fun. It was jaw dropping.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sure they were more than happy to have you in attendance for those sessions. Well, let's move on to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. All due respect to the incredible brass sections of the New York, Vienna, Berlin Philharmonic Orchestras, the CSO brass section is kind of universally regarded as the greatest orchestral brass section of all time. And I know you replaced an icon in Arnold Jacobs, and I can say, in speaking to every tuba player that I know, you have become an icon yourself. So it's a testament to the great work you've done and the great respect that you have for the orchestra and what you did following Arnold Jacobs. Looking back on your 23 years now in the orchestra, can you just share, gosh, it could be anything and everything you want to say about what being in the orchestra is like, what it's meant to you, how you feel about it, anything that comes to your mind that you associate with the great Chicago Symphony Orchestra and being a part of that ensemble?
Well, probably the best thing that first came out of my mouth after I was told that I won the job was that I was in a small room, and Arnold Jacobs was there, and Sir George Schulte was there, and the personnel manager at the time, and maybe some others. And Schulte told me that I had the job, and I made it very clear that I was not replacing Arnold Jacobs, because Arnold Jacobs was not replaceable. But I do appreciate the opportunity to be picked to be a part of this ensemble. So, because nobody could replace Arnold Jacobs. In fact, nobody can replace anybody else really, but especially him, because he was just bigger than life. So, if I kept on trying to convince myself I was trying to replace him, I'd probably be a nervous wreck. But I do remember what I was taught those many years ago, studying with Tommy Johnson and Jeff Reynolds, is just to be yourself. Be as good as you can yourself, and that'll probably do what would be enough. So, okay, so Chicago. It was kind of a shock to hear the energy of that ensemble and hear the energy of the brass section, because St. Louis was, which was my previous job, was a very, very well balanced brass section. Coming into Chicago, the section was well balanced, but everything was just on a higher level. It was on a more decibel oriented level. And when I first came to a rehearsal and I heard the trumpets warming up, I thought it was a joke. I mean, it was so loud, I thought that this was just, they can't possibly be serious. Then I realized, no, this is their volume level. This is what they're setting up. This is a standard. I mean, nobody in the string section was flinching. I mean, when they were warming up, this is just normal. This is just life as we know it. And it probably took 9 months to a year for me to even catch up with that volume level. It just seemed that I had to just increase everything, increase my air capacity, increase my exchange of air, make it a lot easier, make it a lot make it a lot more flowing, and to actually have trust in the instrument that I was actually putting out enough sound, because there was just an awful lot of decibels coming out of everything above me, and so that was one of the biggest shocks. The second biggest shock was just hearing how soft everybody could play.
Oh, wow.
Especially the trombone section. The trombone section is just unbelievable how soft they can play when given a particular, and certain people, like, for example, Jay Friedman. I mean, just the softest, most beautiful round upper register that you could imagine. I mean, it's just silky. And soon after I got there, Frank Crisafulli retired, and new trombone player Michael Mulcahy came in about 3 or 4 months after I left. And to have this guy around was pretty amazing, because he's just an all-around wonderful player, can do anything. His pitch is really good, just makes everything in the first parts and the third part sound great, because he's such a great second player. And that's just the start of where Mulcahy is. And Charlie has a great contrabass register on the trombone, and really rich sound, and so trying to blend with that and trying to kind of eke out a bit of territory beneath his gorgeous bass trombone sound was a big goal of mine, because she takes up so much space. So it took a while to make this change into the Chicago sound, and fortunately, we did some Bruckner symphonies and some Mahler symphonies. Well, we've done them very often, but especially those were very informative times for me, because I had to learn to come up to this type of level of playing, which they were used to. And eventually, I guess it happened, but I felt like I was pretty much going pedal to the metal to try to keep up, especially when I first got there.